November 16th, 1951. As the morning mist gently dissipated over Portsmouth Harbor, Captain Dennis Campbell ascended the gangway of HMS Illustrious. Within the confines of his briefcase lay a solitary sheet of paper, bearing a diagram of remarkable simplicity, almost childlike in its execution, a flight deck, subtly angled by 10 degrees towards the port side. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing particularly groundbreaking. Yet, unbeknownst to him at that precise moment, this seemingly unassuming drawing was destined to, within an astonishing span of 18 months, preserve the lives of more naval aviators than any sophisticated weapon system ever conceived. What Captain Campbell did comprehend, however, was a truth that filled him with dread. Over the preceding 12 months alone, the Royal Navy had tragically lost 43 aircraft due to landing mishaps. A stark tally of 43 machines utterly destroyed, 17 pilots fatally killed, and dozens more left permanently scarred. Every single one of these devastating losses had occurred during the critical final 30 seconds of flight, that perilous instant when a colossal 30-ton jet, hurtling at 140 miles per hour, endeavored to ensnare an arresting wire on a violently pitching deck, while a formidable steel barricade loomed a mere 60 feet ahead, poised to obliterate any aircraft that failed to secure its landing. The challenges faced by the Americans were even more severe. In the year 1951, U.S. Navy carrier Aviation recorded an alarming 776 Class A mishaps, incidents invariably resulting in either fatalities or the complete loss of an aircraft, translating to an average of more than 2 such catastrophic events every single day. While these numbers were staggering during peacetime, the Korean War tragically magnified the bloodshed. The USS Boxer, for instance, reported 7 barrier crashes during a single deployment. The USS Princeton, another carrier, lost 9 aircraft within a mere 4 weeks. On the traditional straight-deck carriers, missing the arresting wires presented an inescapable outcome. Pilots either slammed into the barricade at full throttle or plowed directly into the aircraft parked forward, thereby igniting a raging inferno capable of claiming a dozen lives in mere seconds. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, we ask you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The dawn of the jet age had undeniably arrived, yet the infrastructure and operational methodologies of carrier aviation proved woefully inadequate to keep pace. The F-9F Panther, for example, touched down at a speed 40 knots faster than its propeller-driven predecessor, the Hellcat. Moreover, the new jet Cessna engines required an agonizing 7 seconds to spool up from idle, an eternity when one was plummeting towards the unforgiving ocean at a rate of 20 feet per second. Time twos. Landing signal officers, positioned precariously on the carrier's port quarter, would frantically wave their paddles, attempting to guide pilots. However, by the time a pilot recognized that they were approaching too low, too fast, or too high, the immutable laws of physics had often already sealed their grim fate. Every admiral, every engineer, and every test pilot implicitly understood the stark reality. Carrier aviation had reached its critical breaking point. While jets undeniably represented the future of aerial combat, such a future held little relevance when the immediate present was systematically decimating its most valuable asset, its human personnel. What Captain Campbell remained blissfully unaware of, a truth equally hidden from everyone present in that Portsmouth meeting room, was that his audacious concept would face outright rejection. be subjected to ridicule, and be labeled as utterly impossible by the very experts whose professional mandate was to conquer insurmountable challenges. Furthermore, the eventual breakthrough would not emerge from the deliberations of committees or the controlled environments of wind tunnels, but rather from the unwavering resolve of a single individual who adamantly refused to accept that brave men should perish due to a fundamental design flaw. The genesis of this profound problem could be traced back to 1945, the precise moment Lieutenant Commander William P. Rahn executed the inaugural jet landing aboard the USS Wake Island. His FFR-1 Fireball touched down at a blistering 90 knots, a speed 20 knots greater than any piston-powered fighter, causing the arresting gear cables to shriek under the immense strain as they absorbed the colossal kinetic energy. While the landing itself was successful, the ominous warning it implicitly conveyed was tragically disregarded. By 1950, every major navy across the globe found itself grappling with this identical escalating crisis. Jet engines had undeniably revolutionized aerial speed and altitude capabilities, but their inherent sluggish throttle response inadvertently created a deadly trap for pilots. On propeller aircraft, pilots could simply chop the throttle upon receiving the landing signal officer's cut signal and literally settle onto the deck. Jets, however, were incapable of such a maneuver. They were compelled to land power on, maintaining a degree of thrust until their wheels made contact, primarily because their engines required an unacceptably long time to accelerate if a go-around became necessary. This operational imperative birthed a truly nightmarish scenario. Pilots would execute their final approach with engines spooled up, fully committed to the landing, yet tragically unable to rapidly ascend if they missed the crucial arresting wires. On a conventional straight-deck carrier, 4 arresting wires were stretched across a mere 60 feet of deck space. Directly behind these wires stood the crash barricade, an intricate web of steel cables specifically engineered to ensnare aircraft that overshot the wires. Beyond that, rows of parked aircraft, volatile fuel trucks, and ammunition carts were arrayed. Everything necessary to transform the flight deck into an active and inherently dangerous combat zone. The underlying mathematics of this situation were brutally unforgiving. A Panther jet, landing at 125 knots, covered an astonishing 201 feet per second. Consequently, if a pilot missed all 4 arresting wires, they had precisely 2.1 seconds before an inevitable collision with the barricade. The barricade, on occasion, proved effective. However, when it failed, a 30-ton mass of jet fuel and ordnance would violently plow into the aircraft parked forward at a terrifying speed of 100 miles per hour. Captain Bruce Williams, who served as the air operations officer on the USS Kearsarge, bore witness to the horrific deaths of 11 men when a barrier catastrophically failed in March 1951. The official accident report chillingly documented, "Aircraft struck barrier at full power. Barrier separated. Aircraft continued forward into 6 parked Corsairs. Resulting fire reached Aviation gasoline stores. 14 aircraft destroyed. 11 personnel killed, 23 injured. Carrier operations suspended. 48 hours." The prevailing solution, which everyone desperately attempted, involved the development of improved barriers. The British, for instance, introduced the flex deck, a rubberized landing surface that, in theory, could arrest jets without the need for traditional landing gear. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown conducted 40 landings on this innovative system at Farnborough. In his official reports, he lauded it as fundamentally sound. However, to his close confidants, he candidly described it as bloody terrifying. The Americans, for their part, constructed increasingly robust barricades. The Bureau of Aeronautics invested a substantial $2 million into developing the Davis barrier system, a formidable mechanical web designed to halt a 25,000-pound aircraft at full throttle. When this system functioned as intended, its effectiveness was impressive. Yet, when it failed, the ensuing devastation was absolute. Crucially, however, stronger barriers did not prevent crashes. They merely served to contain their catastrophic consequences. Every seasoned aviator understood the true root of the problem: the flight deck itself. Captain William T. Rashure, who headed Aviation Military Characteristics at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, articulated this concern in June 1945, writing, "Current landing procedures force all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone, with zero margin for error. This is incompatible with jet aircraft performance characteristics." His statement, when translated from bureaucratic jargon, essentially meant, "We designed our carriers for propeller aircraft capable of landing at 70 knots and aborting at the very last second. Jets, however, land at 130 knots and cannot abort. We are attempting to land 1952 aircraft on 1942 ships. People will continue to die until we rectify this fundamental flaw." There was universal agreement on this point. Everyone recognized the problem, yet no one seemed capable of devising a viable solution. The British experimented with flex decks. The Americans tried enhanced barriers, then backup barriers, and even emergency net systems. The French explored reducing aircraft weight. Nothing yielded the desired results. The accident rate continued its alarming ascent. What was desperately needed was someone audacious enough to challenge the one sacrosanct element no one dared question. Why must the landing area be parallel to the ship's longitudinal axis? What they needed, in essence, was Dennis Campbell. Captain Dennis Royal Farson Campbell, by all conventional measures, was not destined to solve such a monumental challenge. He was, fundamentally, a bureaucrat. Born on November 13, 1907, in Southsea, England, Campbell commenced his career in the Royal Navy in 1925 as a midshipman. He successfully qualified as a pilot in September 1931, early enough to have experience flying fabric-covered biplanes, yet late enough to grasp that naval aviation was far from a mere gentleman's diversion, but rather a rigorous profession demanding absolute engineering precision. During the tumultuous years of World War II, he flew Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, those seemingly obsolete aircraft that nonetheless played a pivotal role in crippling the formidable Bismarck. He was decorated with the Distinguished Service Cross for his valor. No one ever hailed him as a genius, nor was he lauded as a visionary. Following the war, the Admiralty assigned him to the Ministry of Supply as Deputy Chief RN Representative, a quintessential desk job involving the management of technical liaison between the Navy and various civilian contractors. He possessed no formal engineering credentials, no advanced academic degrees. His primary responsibilities revolved around paperwork, meticulously tracking development schedules, attending countless coordination meetings, and signing requisitions. However, Dennis Campbell possessed one invaluable quality that academic credentials simply cannot impart: an inability to disregard the tragic loss of pilots' lives. In 1951, he attended the somber funeral of Lieutenant Michael Mick Lithgow, a test pilot who had been tragically killed when his jet impacted the barricade on HMS Implacable. Lithgow had been a former student of Campbell's, a vibrant 23-year-old. His approach had been flawless, his speed perfect, yet he had floated a mere 6 feet too far and consequently missed the arresting wires. The barricade failed, and Lithgow's aircraft disintegrated. His young widow was 5 months pregnant. Campbell stood at that, graveside, and later confided in his deputy, Lieutenant Commander Nick Goodhart, "This is utterly insane. We are effectively murdering them with our own equipment. A pilot does everything correctly and still dies because 60 feet is an insufficient margin for error. There simply has to be another way." Goodhart, perhaps understandably, expected nothing further. Officers often utter such sentiments at funerals. But Campbell's obsession persisted. He meticulously retrieved accident reports. He interviewed numerous landing signal officers, LSOs. He painstakingly studied landing patterns. Lacking an engineering background, he resorted to the method non-engineers often employ. He drew pictures. The profound revelation struck him during a routine train journey from Portsmouth to London. Campbell incessantly sketched carrier decks in his notebook, desperately attempting to conceptualize a way to afford pilots more crucial space. "If you cannot make the landing area longer," he mused, "then make it wider. If you cannot make it wider because the ship has a fixed beam, then angle it. Angle it." He then drew a flight deck canted 10 degrees to port. With this simple alteration, the landing zone no longer terminated abruptly at the barricade. Instead, it concluded in the vast expanse of open water. A pilot who missed the arresting wires could now simply advance his throttle, climb away safely, and attempt the landing once more. There would be no barricade, no parked aircraft, no catastrophic collision, only the forgiving air and ocean, offering a precious second chance. The idea possessed such an elegant simplicity that it almost felt foolish, which implied either he had stumbled upon something truly brilliant, or he had overlooked an obvious detail that every seasoned engineer already understood. On August 7, 1951, Captain Dennis Campbell convened a pivotal meeting at the Ministry of Supply. In attendance were Louis Boddington, Director of the Naval Air Department, Farnborough, Rear Admiral M.S. Slattery, Chief of Naval Research, and 6 distinguished senior aviation engineers. Campbell, with a palpable sense of anticipation, opened his briefcase and presented them with his groundbreaking sketch. Upon Captain Campbell's presentation of his innovative sketch, the atmosphere within the room immediately became charged with intense opposition. Commander James, a distinguished senior flight operations specialist, articulated his disapproval without needing to raise his voice, yet his pronouncements resonated with the undeniable authority of scientific law. He declared the proposal completely illegal, citing the International Air Navigation Convention, which mandated that all flight operations must align precisely with the vessel's axis. James emphasized that Campbell's concept flagrantly contravened a long-established maritime aviation law, one forged through 15 years of extensive carrier operations. He dismissed it, not as a genuine advancement, but as amateur nonsense, a condescending judgment that Campbell, though anticipating resistance, had not foreseen. Commander James pressed his argument further, detailing the profound operational challenges inherent in Campbell's design. He explained that asking pilots to land perpendicular to the ship's natural motion, its inherent pitching and rolling around the keel, would subject them to a constant, unpredictable battle against drift. The landing area, he contended, would shift beneath the aircraft in ways pilots could neither foresee nor counteract, inevitably leading to a surge in crashes rather than a reduction. Lieutenant Commander Goodhart prepared to counter these points. But Louis Boddington, a civilian engineer hailing from Farnborough, interceded with a raised hand, signaling a different approach. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of this video for the full story. Your like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Please share where you are from in the comments and your thoughts on this fascinating topic. Show me the math, Boddington calmly requested, prompting a moment of bewilderment. I beg your pardon? Came the reply. Boddington reiterated his demand for empirical data. The math. You claim pilots will contend with drift. Quantify it. With an 8-degree angle on a deck experiencing 12-degree rolls, what is the calculated differential drift over a typical 30-second approach? A profound silence descended upon the room. Boddington surveyed the other engineers present, repeating, Anyone? Still, no one offered a response. Then we test it, Boddington declared decisively. He proposed utilizing the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, which possessed a painted outline runway. He suggested that an angled deck outline could be temporarily applied to HMS Triumph's flight deck. In 1 week, he continued, we will conduct simulated touch-and-go approaches. If the drift problem is a genuine impediment, we will measure its extent. Conversely, if it proves to be merely theoretical catastrophizing, that too will become evident. Rear Admiral Slattery leaned back, a note of gravity in his voice. Louis, you understand that if you paint an angled deck on Triumph and pilots begin to crash, you will effectively end both your career and Captain Campbell's. Noted, sir, Boddington replied, a slight smile playing on his lips. And if it works, then we stop killing pilots who have done everything right. The trials commenced in September 1951. HMS Triumph departed Portsmouth, her axial flight deck now adorned with a white painted outline representing the proposed angled deck, a conceptual modification rather than a structural alteration. For a period of 3 weeks, Royal Navy pilots executed numerous touch-and-go approaches, treating the painted lines as if they demarcated a true deck edge. The much-anticipated drift problem, however, failed to materialize. Astonishingly, pilots adapted to the new configuration within just 2 landings. What they discovered instead was an unprecedented sense of operational freedom. Lieutenant Peter Chilton, one of the participating test pilots, later articulated this profound shift, writing, I came in too high, floated past the wires, and for the first time in my career I wasn't terrified. I just poured on power and climbed away. No barrier waiting to kill me. No aircraft ahead, just clean air and a second chance. I felt like I'd been given my life back. By October, these painted deck trials had conclusively validated the concept. The subsequent challenge, however, proved to be far more formidable, persuading the broader naval community. Given that HMS Triumph was a British vessel, the carrier fleet grappling with the most severe issues, specifically, the American carriers whose pilots were suffering fatalities at twice the rate of the Royal Navy, was the United States Navy. And the U.S. Navy, historically, was not inclined to accept operational instruction from British officers regarding aircraft landing procedures. On September 14, 1951, at the U.S. Naval Air Test Center, in Patuxent River, Maryland, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown found himself standing before a contingent of 40 American test pilots. He was acutely aware of the scrutinizing gaze of every individual in the room, each mentally assessing his credibility. Brown, the Royal Navy's chief test pilot, held an unparalleled distinction, having landed more distinct aircraft types than any other individual in aviation history. He was the holder of every significant British naval aviation record. Yet in that moment, none of these accolades seemed to matter, for he was poised to inform the United States Navy that the fundamental design of their aircraft carriers was flawed. "Gentlemen," Brown began, his voice cutting through the tension, "in the past 12 months, how many of you have hit the barricade?" Initially, 7 hands cautiously rose, followed by 12, then 15, a stark visual representation of the pervasive danger. Brown then posed a more somber query. "How many of you know someone who died hitting the barricade?" This time, every single hand in the room ascended. Brown then opened his briefcase, retrieving a diagram. "I am going to show you something the Royal Navy is currently evaluating. It will undoubtedly strike you as absurd, but I have personally executed 63 landings using this method, and I am standing here before you, rather than having been scraped from a deck. Therefore, I implore you to extend me the courtesy of a full hearing." He then affixed Captain Campbell's diagram to the wall, revealing an aircraft carrier flight deck angled 8 degrees to port. The room erupted in a cacophony of incredulous shouts and exclamations. "You intend for us to land sideways?" One pilot demanded. "The landing signal officer will be unable to accurately perceive the approach angle," another exclaimed. "What about the island? You have shifted the primary landing zone dangerously close to the superstructure." Brown patiently waited for the clamor to subside. "Every single objection you have just voiced," he responded, "was precisely what we ourselves initially raised. However, we proceeded to test it, and this is what our findings revealed. When you fail to catch the arresting wires on an angled deck, you do not perish. You simply advance the throttle and execute a go-around. It is as straightforward as that." Commander Harold Buell, the commanding officer of VF-84, rose to address Brown directly. "Commander Brown," he stated, "I have been conducting carrier landings since 1943. What you are describing fundamentally contravenes every operational principle we have painstakingly developed over 8 years of intensive combat operations. You are asking us to discard proven doctrine in favor of a British theoretical concept." Brown's retort was swift and piercing. "I am asking you to cease dying due to a design flaw." A profound silence enveloped the room, the weight of Brown's words settling heavily. Brown continued, elaborating on the core issue. "You are presently landing jet aircraft on straight decks simply because that is the infrastructure you possess. However, straight decks were originally engineered for propeller-driven aircraft such as Corsairs and Hellcats, which possessed the capability to rapidly cut throttle and virtually fall onto the deck. Modern jets are incapable of such maneuvers. Consequently, you are effectively forcing 1952-era aircraft into 1942-era operational procedures, and your personnel are suffering fatalities as a direct result. The angled deck does not violate established doctrine. Rather, it intelligently adapts the carrier to align with the capabilities of contemporary aircraft." Rear Admiral Apollo Susek, the highest-ranking U.S. Navy aviator stationed in London, stepped forward, lending crucial support. "I have personally observed the Triumph tests," he affirmed. "Commander Brown's assessment is accurate. The concept is demonstrably effective. I have formally recommended to the Chief of Naval Operations that we conduct parallel trials on the USS Midway." However, Rear Admiral Alfred Pride, who served as the Chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, shook his head in disagreement. "We are already actively evaluating alternative solutions," he asserted. The Davis barrier, for instance, boasts a documented 98.7% success rate. 98% of what? Brown interjected sharply. Of the aircraft that actually strike it? What about the pilots who never even reach the barrier because they perceive the impending impact and succumb to panic? What about those who deliberately ditch their aircraft in the ocean rather than risking a full-power collision with the barricade? Your statistic measures barrier performance, Admiral. It does not accurately measure pilot survival. The room once again erupted into a clamor of voices and reactions. Approximately half of the pilots present were nodding in agreement with Brown's impassioned argument, while the other half appeared visibly agitated, seemingly prepared to forcibly remove Brown from the base. Admiral Susek, raising his voice above the din, commanded, "Gentlemen, gentlemen, silence," he then declared with finality. "We will proceed with testing the angled deck on USS Midway. This will encompass paint trials and simulated landings. If the concept proves successful, we will undertake a full structural modification on one carrier. If it fails, we will permanently abandon the idea. However, we will not continue to lose pilots to a design flaw that we have the opportunity to test and potentially rectify. Are we clear?" Admiral Pride remained standing for a tense 10 seconds, uttering no words. Then, with an air of grudging acceptance, he stated, "Midway, trials authorized. But if this British pipe dream results in a single additional casualty, I will terminate the program and everyone associated with it." Susek nodded in agreement. Agreed. The meeting concluded. Brown meticulously packed his briefcase, acutely aware that he had just staked his entire career on the efficacy of a painted line. What he could not have known then was that within 90 days the painted line trials on the USS Midway would prove so remarkably successful that the U.S. Navy would proceed to convert USS Antietam into the world's first truly angled deck carrier. On January 12, 1953, off the sun-drenched coast of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell guided his F-9F-5 Panther into the established landing pattern behind the USS Antietam. This marked his 43rd carrier landing, yet it was his inaugural experience with an angled deck that was not merely a painted outline. This was a tangible, structurally integrated modification. An 8-degree sponson, a permanent extension, protruded from the port side, meticulously welded to the carrier's robust hull. Buell, steeped in years of conventional training, harbored a profound distrust for this new configuration. His entire career had been predicated on the imperative to either ensnare an arresting wire or brace for the impact of the barricade, a fear-driven discipline that had, on 2 separate occasions, unequivocally preserved his life. Now he was being instructed to disregard that ingrained instinct. He deployed his landing gear, meticulously adjusted his trim, and transmitted his standard ball call, Panther Ball 3.2. The landing signal officer responded with the customary confirmation, "Roger, Ball." Buell's approach commenced with flawless precision, maintaining an ideal glide path until an unforeseen wind gust abruptly lifted his aircraft 6 feet above the intended trajectory. On a conventional straight deck, this scenario would have prompted the landing signal officer to issue an immediate wave-off, necessitating Buell to climb away, expend precious fuel, and recommence his approach. However, on this day, the LSO remained silent. On an angled deck, being slightly high was not a catastrophic event. It presented an invaluable opportunity for correction. Buell subtly lowered his nose, bleeding off the excess altitude, but in doing so he found himself positioned too far down the deck. He was going to miss the arresting wires. On a straight deck, this situation would have instantly triggered a surge of panic, often leading pilots to execute desperate, ill-advised corrections that frequently culminated in crashes. Yet, Buell consciously forced himself to adhere to the explicit briefing he had received. If you miss, you climb. The deck is clear. Trust it. His wheels made contact with the deck with a firm slam. He bounced once, his tail hook skipped over the first wire, then the second, the third, and finally, the fourth. He had missed them all. On a straight deck, the barricade would, by this point, have been tearing his aircraft apart, but here there was no barricade, only an expanse of open deck and clear air beyond. Buell instinctively shoved his throttle to its full power setting. His J-48 engine spooled up in 6 seconds, an eternity that felt like an unexpected, precious gift. The Panther lifted gracefully into the air. He was flying again. 23 seconds later, he had seamlessly re-entered the landing pattern. On his second approach, he successfully ensnared the 3-wire, executing a perfect landing. As Buell climbed out of his cockpit, his body was trembling, not from fear, but from an overwhelming surge of relief, a profound emotional release he hadn't realized he had been carrying for years. He would later articulate this transformative experience in his autobiography, writing, "To an experienced tailhooker, landing a jet airplane on an angled deck was sheer bliss. For the first time in my career, I wasn't afraid of dying during every approach. The psychological weight that lifted off me that day, I didn't realize I'd been carrying it until it was gone. The aircraft was continuously carried until it was completely gone. Over a period of 60 days, the dedicated aviators of Carrier Air Group 8 executed a remarkable 1,327 successful landings upon the innovative angled deck of the USS Antietam. During this extensive trial, they recorded only 8 bolters, which are instances where pilots failed to catch an arresting wire and were thus required to perform a go-around for another attempt. Had these 8 events transpired on a conventional straight flight deck, such a scenario could have easily resulted in 5 barrier crashes, leading to the destruction of 2 aircraft and potentially claiming the lives of 1 or 2 pilots. However, thanks to the revolutionary angled deck design, the outcome was dramatically different. There were absolutely 0 crashes, no aircraft were lost, and not a single injury was reported among the personnel. The statistical evidence supporting the superiority of this new design was unequivocally compelling. Prior to the widespread adoption of the angled deck, specifically between 1951 and 1952, the U.S. Navy, E's Carrier Aviation Branch, experienced an alarming annual average of 647 Class A mishaps, which are the most severe types of accidents. A staggering 52% of all these losses were directly attributable to landing accidents, highlighting a critical vulnerability in naval air operations. Following the comprehensive implementation of the angled deck, a transformative shift occurred. From 1955 to 1957, the average number of Class A mishaps plummeted to 321 per year. Furthermore, the proportion of these mishaps caused by landing accidents drastically reduced to just 19% of the total. This monumental change represented a 75% decrease in landing accidents and an impressive 80% reduction in fatalities directly linked to barrier crashes. While statistics clearly illustrate the profound impact, they often fail to convey the deeply personal narratives behind these figures. Lieutenant James Davidson, His experience, however, vividly illuminates the human dimension of this groundbreaking innovation. On March 8, 1953, Davidson found himself in a precarious situation, bringing his damaged Panther jet back to the Antietam with critical hydraulic failure, rendering his flaps inoperable and causing his landing speed to be in perilous 20 knots too fast. On a traditional straight deck, the standard protocol would have been to ditch the aircraft in the ocean, a grim alternative to risking a catastrophic barrier crash at a speed of 145 knots. Yet, the Antietam was equipped with the revolutionary angled deck, offering Davidson a crucial lifeline. He made 4 valiant approaches, missing the arresting wires on each preceding attempt. On his 4th and final attempt, Lieutenant Davidson skillfully managed to engage the 4-wire while traveling at an astonishing 142 knots, thereby setting a new record for the fastest successful carrier landing ever recorded up to that point. His aircraft came to a halt with a mere 11 feet of the deck remaining, a testament to both his piloting skill and the safety afforded by the angled design. 6 months later, Davidson penned a heartfelt letter to Captain Campbell, expressing his profound gratitude. "Sir, I have never had the privilege of meeting you, but I am alive today to write this letter precisely because you conceived an idea that virtually everyone dismissed as impossible. My daughter was born just last month, and I was able to be present for that momentous occasion because you steadfastly refused to accept that competent pilots should perish due to flawed design." Time 2's. A simple thank you feels utterly inadequate, but I offer it nonetheless. We implore you to stay with us and watch the remainder of this compelling video. We would be profoundly grateful for your valuable like and for subscribing to our channel. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing where you are from and your thoughts on the significant topic discussed in this video. The profound advantages of the angled deck were swiftly recognized and adopted internationally. The British Royal Navy integrated this innovative design onto HMS Ark Royal in 1955, marking a significant enhancement to their carrier capabilities. Similarly, the French Navy undertook the conversion of their carrier, Clemenceau, while the Australian Navy modified the Melbourne to incorporate this crucial safety feature. By 1957, the angled deck had become a universally accepted standard. Every major aircraft carrier operated by Western nations either already possessed an angled deck or was in the process of being retrofitted with one. Initially, the Soviet Union remained skeptical and rejected the concept. However, after enduring a series of devastating landing accidents on their straight-deck carrier Varyag in 1959, they quietly conceded and implemented the design. Declassified Soviet naval records from 1993 subsequently revealed a dramatic improvement. Landing accidents within their fleet dropped by an impressive 68% within just 6 months of the angled deck's introduction, unequivocally demonstrating its efficacy. However, the most compelling and authentic endorsements for the angled deck emanate directly from the pilots who relied on it. Captain John Moore, a veteran aviator who conducted numerous combat missions over Vietnam from the deck of the USS Coral Sea, offered a powerful personal testimony. Between 1954 and 1973, I executed 947 carrier landings. During that time, I experienced 62 bolters, instances where I missed all the arresting wires, on a straight deck. Each of those 62 occurrences represented a potential barrier crash. 62 distinct opportunities to either lose my own life or inadvertently cause the deaths of the sailors working on the forward deck. Instead, I simply climbed away, circled, and attempted the landing again. Virtually every pilot of my generation carries the vivid memory of friends who tragically perished in the 1950s due to striking the barricades. We, the survivors, are alive today because Dennis Campbell meticulously drew a simple line on a piece of paper and adamantly refused to be silenced about its critical importance. By 1975, the angled deck had become so ubiquitous and fundamental to carrier operations that younger pilots were often unaware that aircraft carriers had ever been designed differently. It had transcended its status as a mere innovation. It was simply the accepted, inherent method by which carriers functioned. A true revolution achieves its completion when it seamlessly integrates into the fabric of everyday practice, becoming virtually invisible. The angled deck undeniably saved thousands of lives, yet Dennis Campbell, its visionary creator, never pursued personal fame or recognition for his monumental achievement. In fact, his actions following this groundbreaking success might prove even more surprising. Captain Dennis Campbell consistently declined all requests for press interviews regarding the angled deck. He received a promotion to Rear Admiral in 1954, a testament to his distinguished service. He was present at the ceremonial launch of HMS Ark Royal, which held the distinction of being the world's first aircraft carrier designed from its very keel with an integrated angled deck. When reporters approached him for commentary at this historic event, he humbly redirected them to Louis Bodington and the dedicated engineers at Farnborough, ensuring proper credit was given to the technical team. In 1955, when the U.S. Navy extended an invitation to Campbell for the commissioning of the USS Forrestal, the inaugural American supercarrier, equipped with an angled deck, advanced steam catapults, and an optical landing aid system, Campbell respectfully sent his regrets. He was instead attending the funeral of a Royal Navy lieutenant who had tragically died in a training accident, an incident unrelated to carrier operations or any of Campbell's direct work involving a helicopter crash. Yenny. However, the lieutenant had served under Campbell's command in 1943, and Campbell held a profound belief that one must always attend the funerals of their personnel, demonstrating his deep commitment to those under his leadership. In 1957, the Admiralty bestowed upon him the prestigious Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE, for his exceptional services to naval aviation. The official citation for this esteemed award consisted of a mere 2 sentences, which Campbell unassumingly kept tucked away in a drawer. He ultimately retired from the Royal Navy in 1960 and subsequently accepted a position as a technical consultant for Hawker Siddeley Aviation, dedicating his expertise to the pioneering development of vertical takeoff jets. His professional colleagues fondly recalled him as a man obsessively dedicated to the paramount issue of pilot safety. This unwavering focus often led him to meticulously scrutinize designs, sometimes to the perceived irritation of engineers, by insisting on the inclusion of what some considered unnecessary redundancies within cockpit systems. Anthony Marsh, an engineer who worked alongside Campbell, recounted, "Dennis would invariably slow down every single design review, posing probing questions such as, 'What precisely transpires if this particular component fails at night during adverse weather conditions?' We would often inform him that the statistical probability of such a failure occurring was a remote 1 in 10,000. To this he would steadfastly reply, But what does the pilot do when it inevitably happens? He never concerned himself with abstract odds. His sole and profound concern was for that singular pilot who might, tragically, experience such ill fortune. Campbell passed away on April 6, 2000, at the venerable age of 92. His obituary in the Times spanned 4 paragraphs, while The Guardian published a 6-paragraph tribute. Both publications acknowledged his pivotal role in the development of the angled deck. However, neither obituary fully encapsulated the true, profound significance of his contribution. What his contribution truly signified is this: every single carrier landing successfully executed since 1953 has been made possible because one resolute pilot utterly refused to accept that his fellow aviators should needlessly perish. Today, without exception, every aircraft carrier operating globally, whether American, British, French, Indian, Chinese, or Russian, employs an angled deck design. The U.S. Navy's most advanced Gerald R. Ford-class carriers, while incorporating cutting-edge electromagnetic catapults and arresting gear, still feature a flight deck angled precisely 8 degrees to port, mirroring the exact configuration Campbell sketched in 1951. Modern carrier pilots execute over 15,000 landings annually across the U.S. Navy's fleet alone. The bolter rate, remarkably, remains around 8%. This translates to approximately 200 missed wire approaches each year. Without the ingenious angled deck, each of those 1/200 instances would represent a potential catastrophic barrier crash. The sheer number of lives saved is staggering, hundreds per year, accumulating to tens of thousands over the past 70 years. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black of the U.S. Marine Corps, who flew FA-18s from carriers between 1985 and 2007, sought out Campbell's family in 2003 and dispatched a heartfelt letter to them. It read, "While I never had the honor of meeting your father, I completed 147 carrier landings throughout my distinguished career. Of those, I experienced 142 bolters, missing all the arresting wires and necessitating a go-around. On a straight deck, each of those 142 occurrences would have been potential fatal crashes. Instead, I simply climbed away and attempted the landing again. Your father gifted me 142 second chances. He granted me a career. He bestowed upon me a life. On behalf of every carrier pilot who is alive today because of him, I extend my deepest gratitude." Dennis Campbell, having passed away 3 years prior, never responded to that poignant letter. However, his son carefully framed it, recognizing its immense value, especially as his father never retained his own awards. This letter, however, his father would undoubtedly have cherished. The profound lesson to be drawn from this narrative is that some of the most transformative breakthroughs do not always originate from established experts or specialized fields. Instead, they often emerge from individuals who steadfastly refuse to accept "that's how we've always done it" as an adequate answer. Captain Campbell was not an engineer. He was not a test pilot. He was, in essence, a bureaucrat who simply could not ignore the tragic loss of his friends. He possessed the audacious courage to draw a simple line on a piece of paper and pose the fundamental question, why not? The angled deck, his singular invention, saved more lives than any Medal of Honor recipient. It revolutionized naval warfare to a greater extent than either nuclear propulsion or guided missiles. Yet this monumental innovation did not spring from the deliberations of committees or the sophisticated environments of laboratories. It was born from a train ride, a humble notebook, a simple sketch, and the unwavering refusal to remain silent when confronted with universal declarations of impossibility. That truly is the authentic story, and that is precisely why it holds such profound significance. Because the next Dennis Campbell might not be an admiral or an engineer, they might not possess impressive credentials or advanced degrees. They might simply be an ordinary individual who observes a problem that everyone else accepts as inevitable, and yet refuses to accept it themselves. History does not always belong to the loudest voices or those occupying the highest ranks. Sometimes it belongs to that singular person who simply will not permit good people to perish due to a fundamentally flawed design.